General Grievous is one of the most striking villains in all of Star Wars. A mechanical monster who coughs his way through duels while spinning 4 lightsabers like a nightmare blender. To most fans, he is a caricature, a scary-looking bad guy with no depth. But the truth is much darker and far more tragic. Because Grievous was not born a monster, he was made into one. Once upon a time, he was Kumail Jai Shilal, a Kaleesh warrior who fought for his people with honour and pride. He was mutilated, manipulated and rebuilt into something unrecognisable. His body became a weapon, his voice became a wound, and his soul became trapped in a war he could never escape. And that cough everyone remembers, that was not theatrical flair, that was pain. Every breath he took was a reminder that he had been broken. Every strike of his lightsaber was an act of survival. He was not fighting because he wanted to. He was fighting because it was all he knew how to do. The Jedi called him a monster but never once asked where he came from. The Republic called him a threat but never acknowledged the suffering that created him. Even Palpatine saw him as nothing more than a disposable tool. Grievous was feared across the galaxy, but respected by no one. Not even the masters who built him. And that is what makes his story haunting. Grievous was not evil in the same way Palpatine was. He was not twisted like Dooku or consumed like Vader. He was a soldier who never stopped fighting long after the war had already claimed his life. His cruelty was born of loss, not malice. His rage was born of pain, not ambition. In this video we are going to break down why Grievous was more tragic than villainous, how his transformation stripped away his humanity, and why his story is less about power and more about a broken soldier who could never leave the battlefield behind. A coughing mechanical giant who collects lightsabers as trophies and slaughters his enemies without hesitation. But that is the end of his story, not the beginning. To understand why Grievous was not simply evil, we need to look back at where he came from. The Kaleesh warrior Kumail Jai Shilal was not born a villain. He was born a soldier. The Kaleesh were locked in a brutal war with the insectoid Hook. These battles defined Grievous's entire life. He rose through the ranks not because he was cruel, but because he was effective. He led his people in defense of their homeworld against overwhelming odds. To the Kaleesh he was a hero. To the Huck he was a nightmare. And to the Republic he was barely worth noticing. That lack of recognition planted the seeds of resentment that would later be exploited. This is where the story becomes tragic. Grievous did not choose to become a cyborg warlord. He was manipulated into it. Count Dooku and the Sith saw an opportunity. They sabotaged his shuttle, crippling him and leaving him near death. Then they offered him a second chance at life. But that second chance came at a cost. He was rebuilt as something unrecognizable, a body of durasteel with only fragments of flesh and bone remaining. Think about what that means for identity. Grievous lost his face, his voice, his very body. His famous cough was not a design choice, it was an injury, a reminder of how much he had lost. Every time he spoke, every time he wheezed, he was reminded that he was no longer truly Kaleesh. He was a weapon now, a living experiment built by the Sith to serve their war. That is not a choice. That is tragedy disguised as power. And yet people only remember the villain who twirled 4 lightsabers. They forget the man who once fought with honour. They forget the hero his people celebrated. The Republic never saw that side of him because the Republic never cared. To them he was just another enemy general. But to the Kaleesh he was proof that, even in defeat, their spirit had not broken. The galaxy labelled him a monster, but his story is rooted in survival. This is what makes him different from the Sith who manipulated him. Palpatine and Dooku embraced cruelty for its own sake. Grievous embraced survival. He fought not out of ideology, but because fighting was all he knew. When you strip away the spectacle of spinning lightsabers, what you see is a soldier who never stopped fighting even when the war became meaningless. That is not pure evil. That is a broken man stuck on the only path left to him. The Jedi, of course, saw none of this. They saw a butcher. They saw a thief who collected the blades of fallen warriors. But even that detail is telling. Grievous did not wield those lightsabers for fun. He wielded them as symbols of victory against the order that had ignored his people's suffering. Every blade was a reminder that he had taken something back from the galaxy that had abandoned him. It was vengeance wrapped in ritual, and in that sense Grievous represents the failure of the Republic and the Jedi. They ignored the struggles of his people until it was too late. Then they condemned him when he fought back. It is easy to call him a villain when you only see him through their lens. But when you look at his origins, he becomes something far more tragic. Once Grievous became the supreme commander of the droid army, his reputation as a Jedi killer took over. But the way he fought still carried the echoes of his past. He was not a Sith Lord. He did not wield the Force. He relied on skill training and sheer mechanical advantage. And that made him both terrifying and strangely human. His style was born from desperation, not ideology. Look at how he fought. He did not duel with elegance like Dooku or power like Vader. He overwhelmed opponents with speed and unpredictability. 4 lightsabers spinning at once created chaos. That chaos mirrored his life. He was a man who had been shattered and rebuilt, and his fighting style reflected that fractured existence. It was not art. It was survival turned into spectacle. Even his cruelty on the battlefield can be seen through this lens. Grievous did not negotiate, he annihilated. He did not show mercy because mercy had never been shown to him. Every decision he made came from the mindset of someone who had been betrayed by war. When you are stripped of your body and turned into a machine, mercy is not a luxury. It is a weakness. And weakness was something he refused to ever show again. This is why his soldiers followed him so loyally. The droids saw him as a commander who would throw them into endless combat. But the Separatists saw him as a symbol. He was living proof that the galaxy had chewed him up and spat him out, and yet he was still fighting. To the people who aligned with the Separatists, that was inspiring. To the Republic, it was horrifying. And both perspectives were true at the same time. Grievous also carried a deep resentment toward the Jedi specifically. Not just because they opposed him, but because he believed they had allowed his suffering to happen. The Jedi called themselves Guardians of Peace, but where were they when his people were enslaved by the Huk? Where were they when he was mutilated and rebuilt? From his perspective, the Jedi had failed him long before they ever duelled. That resentment fueled every swing of his blade. The galaxy labelled him a monster because it was easier than confronting the truth. If Grievous was simply evil, then no one had to take responsibility for what created him. But if he was broken, manipulated and weaponized, then the Republic, the Jedi, and even the galaxy itself shared some blame. And that is a truth few people wanted to acknowledge. Even Palpatine treated him as disposable. Grievous was never meant to win. He was meant to fight just long enough to justify Palpatine's power grab. His entire existence as Supreme Commander was a performance in someone else's script. That is perhaps the cruelest twist of all. He was fighting endlessly, but his fight was never his own. The cough, the rage, the cruelty. All of it was the mask of a soldier who refused to stop even when the war itself was meaningless. That is why his story hits differently when you step back. He was not evil, he was trapped. What makes Grievous stand out in Star Wars is not just his design or his lightsaber collection. It is the way his story reframes what it means to be a villain. Unlike Palpatine, who revelled in power, or Vader, who was consumed by the dark side, Grievous never truly had a choice. He was pushed down a path until there was no turning back. That makes him less of a monster and more of a cautionary tale. Think about the way his story ends. On Utapau, Obi-Wan finally defeats him, not through strength, but by exploiting the fragility of his body. Beneath the armour, he was still flesh and bone, still vulnerable. That final explosion of his organs was not just a defeat. It was a reminder that under the metal and rage, he was still mortal. Still the soldier who had been broken long ago. This ending feels less like justice and more like tragedy. Obi-Wan did not kill a villain. He put down a soldier who had been fighting too long. There was no redemption arc, because Grievous never had the chance to choose redemption. He had been denied choice from the moment his body was stolen from him. That is what makes his story hit harder than people realise. From a narrative standpoint, Grievous is the embodiment of endless war. He is what happens when a soldier becomes trapped in conflict until it consumes every part of them. The Jedi became generals during the Clone Wars. The clones were bred to fight. But Grievous was the symbol of what happens when you can never stop fighting. You lose your body, your identity, your humanity. And all that remains is the war itself. This is why calling him evil misses the point. Evil implies choice. Evil implies he wanted to hurt others simply for the sake of it. But Grievous's story was not about choice. It was about inevitability. About a man who was pushed until the only thing left was to fight. That is tragedy, not villainy. In many ways, Grievous is the mirror of Anakin Skywalker. Both were warriors consumed by conflict. Both were remade into something unrecognizable. Both were used as tools by Palpatine. The difference is that Anakin had a chance at redemption, while Grievous never did. That contrast makes Anakin's story shine brighter and Grievous's story darker. Even the way Star Wars fans talk about him reflects this misunderstanding. We laugh at the cough, we mock the cape, we call him a cartoon villain. But behind all that style is pain. Behind the theatrics is a soldier who never escaped the cycle of violence. The comedy heeds the tragedy. If you strip away the armour and the lightsabers, what you are left with is a soldier who never stopped fighting. That is not the story of a villain. That is the story of someone broken by a galaxy that only saw him as a weapon. And maybe that is why Grievous still resonates. Because his story is not about power. It is about loss. And that is always more haunting.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.